the book zealots. I am Prometheus. Today we will be talking about On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. 20 lessons from the 20th century. Speaking about, of course, the tyranny that occurred during the 20th century. Fun time, as anybody who reads up on the world wars will know, or the interwar years. Real fun. And if you're here for the short version, I would recommend, at the very least for political, I don't know how to describe it, would recommend. Now, probably shouldn't be poking at that. What I thought of the book, it was a good book. It had some very interesting points in it, but I feel like it suffered from a bit of political bias to a certain extent. But I think that also may have been due to the fact that it was published in 2017. And since then, there have been many other incidences that have happened that would definitely be worth mention for the purposes of the book, as it would allow it to have a more bipartisan feel. And by bipartisan, I mean bashing both parties instead of just the Republicans of the 2016 era. Now, Timothy Snyder, as far as I remember, is a professor at Yale, and if I remember correctly, he studied European politics of the 20th century, which, of course, had a lot of fun political movements, as those of us who are a little more well-read than the public school system, or heck, even in the public school system, would know. Yeah. Europe came up with some neat stuff. But that being said, I feel like the book was stuck in that mindset. The term hammer sees everything as a nail sticks out, as it felt like he was pigeonholing? I don't know the exact word or terminology to use. Basically, there were certain situations that he brought up that, while not great, did seem a little out of context. Felt like he was seeing things that weren't there, if that makes any sense. Now, some of the things he mentioned, I definitely agree with. I mean, we all know our politicians are suboptimal these days. Who's satisfied with their politicians? Name one. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that. How do I put this? That's pretty much all I have to say on the book. Is that I feel it was a little partisan, a little narrow in viewpoint due to his, I feel like his profession definitely influenced him a lot in his decisions, or the way he wrote his book, and should do with a reprint. But, that's what I wanted to mention. So he mentioned certain things like supporting print media instead of bloggers and stuff like that, as print media has integrity to get to the truth, and it's not cheap, which I completely understand. Lord knows what having to fly to LA to get a source for something costs a New York Times writer. I don't want to know. I don't even know if that would happen. I'm not into the news gig, so I couldn't say. But also, I disagree with him on that to a certain extent, because print media hasn't exactly been what one would call the most accurate in recent years, the most professional in recent years. Now, granted, I can't exactly call a blogger any more professional. And what he mentions does make sense. Now, of course, he was talking about this in 2017, coming right off the hinges, or the heels, not the hinges, the heels of the 2016 elections, which of course had to do with Russian collusion and all that good stuff, as I'm sure everybody remembers to one extent or another. Now, he mentioned that Ukraine went under a similar attack in 2013, if I remember correctly, and they reacted a lot quicker. Well, I think that was also due to the fact that they trusted their media a lot more. You see, American media is kind of it's not very trustworthy, is what I'm trying to get to. And so I can't exactly say I agree with his position of supporting print media, because at this rate, how much more trustworthy are they of the bloggers? I honestly don't know. I mean, obviously they put a lot more effort into it, hopefully. But when you consider the fact that you have military magazines publishing things about the F-35 that can be seen as blatantly wrong, and that's their whole job, well, it doesn't exactly lead to a lot of hope. Now, this also, to some extent, has to do with information. Now, he was talking about how we can't get stuck in the rut of information. How did he put it? Basically, we have to trust something, if I remember, is how he put it. One second. Sorry about that. We have to trust something. Well, there was a question in my school that I had to take a test on for information literacy. And it always seemed kind of funny to me, because the question was, which source of information was the most accurate for a brand of toothpaste? A blogger's post, a dentist who was funded by the company who made the toothpaste, or an FDA written thingamabob report. Now, obviously, they wanted the answer of the government, which, you know, is all fine and dandy, except now that we're getting news reports out, and have been getting them for some years now, of the FDA getting people off the heels of corporate lifespans, getting into the FDA and helping push through questionable products, and then once they're done at the FDA, they come right back to the position in the company, usually with a little bit higher of a pay grade. It makes you question the government. Now, that doctor who was getting paid off by the company to advertise it obviously isn't exactly trustworthy either, and there's no telling with the blogger. So the question is, who do you trust now? The blogger might be right because they've experienced it, or the company might actually be truthful in saying it, or the government might actually have done its job. How can we tell the difference in this day and age? You would have to test it yourself. And that's basically taking your life into your own hands, because Lord knows what that toothpaste is going to do to you. Freaking Radium Girls 2.0. No, thank you. And so, in that respect, I kind of have to argue with him to the fact that, yeah, what you're saying sounds good on paper, but in practice, who do you really trust? Do I trust the government, which most Americans don't, and hasn't exactly proven itself trustworthy in recent years? Do I trust the random blogger who might just be paid off as well, or is a little bit crazy, but might actually be onto something? Maybe. But that's kind of a throwing a nickel across the room in terms of accuracy. Or do you trust that the company actually has your best interests in mind? I think we can all agree that major companies probably don't. And smaller companies are even questionable in that respect as well. So, either way, it's really your point of view that changes in who you trust. and you can get screwed either way. It's not a fun place to be. So in that particular respect about who to trust, I disagree with him on, because print media, not exactly any better than the bloggers at this rate. They suffer from woozle syndrome. Now, I also, something I agree with him on, is that during the 2016 election, the victor of that particular election, at least from his book, I was a little too young. While I was politically active, I didn't really understand it, nor did I get too into the election. I just didn't want Hillary to win. Ugh. Now, I understand that he is a professor of 20th century European politics, so when he saw certain behaviors coming from the Republican Party, it caused a bit of pause and concern. I get that. You don't want to see your country end up like Austria, or the country a bit north of Austria. But I also feel like he's missing a bit of context in the fact that we are not 20th century Europe. This is a little different. Now, granted, we should take notes from history, but we should also understand that certain things cannot happen in the same exact way. Would the Russian Revolution ever happen in America the same way it did in Russia during World War I? Doubtful. It's a different situation, different context, different people, different culture. So, in that respect, we can definitely take cliff notes on the Russian Revolution or something similar to it, but we cannot directly form analogies to the Russian Revolution. If that's making any sense, I doubt it. So, good book. I would recommend, but take with a grain of salt, and take what he's saying and apply it to every situation you can find. Political, non-political, whatsoever. Political and non-political, and try and see what you can find. Take the suggestions that he's made and trying to apply it to your own party and to the other's party, or to some random guy in the middle of Somalia, and see how it works out. That way you can have a bit more of a wider base to see if his political theories hold up. That basically applied the scientific method to it. We have not seen him proved wrong, but it doesn't mean he's right either. So, that's about as much as I can suggest for on Tyranny. I know it's not terribly great, not a whole lot mentioned, but that's pretty much all I have. It was a good book, had some interesting, thought-provoking, but it did seem to suffer from bias. If I have not made that clear in the last 20 minutes of my rambling. And I would recommend reading it. It's 125 pages. You can read it in an afternoon, like I did. I think that's probably the preferred method of reading it. And if the author ever happens to see this, I would suggest a reprint to include a little bit of both parties. Other than that, pretty good book. Would recommend. I've repeated that, I'm sorry. And, yeah. Come back, and hopefully I'll have this regulator apart and have read another book over the break. Thank you for watching.